It is great to be back. Good morning. I am Christy Senatori, the Executive Director for the Cape Cod Commission. And it was great to see so many new attendees this year. I was here last year and I asked this question, but I'd like to ask it again about how many people have been to Cape Cod, just a show of hands. Okay, so some familiarity, certainly, with the Cape. So the Cape Cod Commission is the regional planning agency for Cape Cod. Our jurisdiction covers about 15 towns. And although we have 15 unique individual towns, we like to refer to ourselves as one Cape. We like to push the boundaries of the municipalities and really get them to work collectively on a lot of our regional challenges facing the Cape. And so what does it mean to be resilient Cape Cod? We think of ourselves in terms of systems. We have our community systems, which are our people. We have our economic systems and our environmental systems. And what I'm going to focus on today is really the impacts that are facing our region due to coastal hazards and climate change. And I flew in yesterday, 3,000 miles from here to Los Angeles. And when my GPS tells me, get in the 5 middle lanes on the highway, I certainly knew I was not on Cape Cod anymore. We have a much smaller community on the Cape. Our largest roadways are about 2 lanes, and that's only for a very short period of time. So we have about 400 miles square wide on the Cape, but we have a significant amount of coastline, and we have been experiencing severe weather, severe storms, and our impacts from these severe weather and severe storms has become so much greater. And when I flew in yesterday, the temperature here was somewhere in the 70s, and back home it was somewhere in the 60s, which is really kind of unbelievable for the month of February. And I think I've spent more days on the beach with my dogs this winter than I have in any other winter. My children are not happy because they haven't had a single snow day, but my dogs are happy. So I wanted to just set the stage by showing some pictures of some of the areas in our region and some of the impacts from some of these coastal and more extreme weather events that we've been experiencing. So I just have a short video that I'll play for a moment. There is sound. So we have about 586 miles of tidal shoreline. So you can see that area that's outlined in orange there is all our tidal shoreline that's at risk to flooding and erosion currently. And we know that the effects of severe weather, climate change, sea level rise will only make these risks more intense. So what you'll see outlined in blue here is the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area. So that actually accounts for about 19% of the Cape's land mass. And what's more important is that actually accounts for about $16 billion of total assessed value of property. So $16 billion of investment that's been made into this region is actually in that special flood hazard area. Our towns have identified critical facilities. About 30% of those are located in this special flood hazard area. So these include some of our fire stations, police stations, even a few of our emergency management systems and our hospitals. Part of what makes the Cape unique is our historic character and our unique villages, and over 1,500 of our inventoried historic structures are located in the special flood hazard area. And we actually have a number of uninventoried historic structures, so if you were to look at those as well, it's about 2,300. So as we look forward for future planning and growth on the Cape and where development makes the most sense, increasing resiliency from some of these impacts has been a regional priority for us and will continue to be a regional priority for the Cape Cod Commission. So over the course of the past several years, we have been looking at coastal resiliency as a region. And we have our project that's known as our Resilient Cape Cod project, where we're looking at the environmental and socioeconomic impacts of different strategies. So what types of strategies that we can use to mitigate and adapt to coastal erosion, coastal storms, can we deploy as a region? So we have a number of project partners that we've been working with, and the development of several products that I'll walk through with you in just a moment. So there were several key components of this project: a very robust community engagement process, the development of an adaptation strategies database, a socioeconomic analysis. We engaged with an environmental economist to look at some of the impacts to our economy on the region. And then the development of an online decision support tool really used to be able to communicate not only our vulnerabilities, but to look at how we can apply some of these strategies along our coastline. And so that tool is called our Cape Cod Coastal Planner. And the address for that is capecodcoast.org. And I would encourage you after this to take a look at it, and you can drill in on certain areas along the Cape coastline. So the vulnerabilities that I've mentioned and that we'll go into some detail on this morning are looking at erosion along our coastline, storm surge, and the impacts from sea level rise. So I mentioned the community engagement process that we went through. We engaged stakeholders across a wide region. We had about 120 stakeholders follow us through a very lengthy process of over 50 meeting hours. And you'll see along the shoreline and the map on the very bottom right, we didn't look at engaging stakeholders within their town or within their subregion. We looked at it in terms of the proximity to the certain water body. So for example, those along the North Shore were encouraged to attend stakeholder meetings in the Cape Cod Bay area. Much like we did with our wastewater efforts that we've been working with on the Cape, we know that these issues transcend municipal boundaries, and so we needed to make sure that these conversations were had at the appropriate scale. So we created several story maps as part of this project, but one in particular was important for us to really work with our stakeholders across the region to let them identify for us areas that they know that there's potential impacts when there's severe storms. And so we were able to capture images that stakeholders were able to upload themselves. We were able to identify case studies and put this all in an area where stakeholders could engage with it on their own. So for example, these are some local stories of areas where stakeholders could identify that, yes, I saw this beach erosion in this area. And this was another area where there was significant beach erosion, and this was a significant area of public beaches for the region. Case studies like the 1991 Hurricane Bob flooding, a lot of people had photographs at home that they were really anxious to share with the community. And then, of course, we wanted to make sure we could put it into a 3D environment. So this is a storm overwash area in the town of Truro in the Outer Cape. And really an ability for us as planners in the region to take a look at not only at the impacts now, but what might be the impacts into the future. So the development of the Adaptation Strategies database was a significant amount of effort in trying to capture all of the types of mitigation and adaptation strategies that could be applied in the Cape. So this would really start from doing nothing. What would be the impacts to our region if we really didn't employ any strategies? To ones with more mild impacts, such as beach nourishment, moving up the scale to offshore reefs, and then looking at those that may even be more hard structures, such as coastal armoring. So these are all contained, there's about 40 or so, in a database, and they're categorized by whether they protect, accommodate, or retreat. So protecting our structures and protecting our infrastructure would really be those strategies that I highlighted at the beginning of the spectrum. If we're looking to accommodate structures, we may be elevating them. We may be raising those structures out of harm's way. And then certainly, the more difficult conversations to have are those conversations around retreat and potential movement of infrastructure, or potential changes to regulations that wouldn't allow future development in these areas. So this is all contained within a strategies matrix that we've been able to develop. And this is available on our website as well. The adaptation strategies, each of the 40 strategies contains an educational fact sheet that can be downloaded, as well as the comprehensive matrix. And then this is the listing of each of the strategies that you can go in and take a look at all of the different information about each particular one. So the fact sheets that I mentioned are developed for each of the strategies, and they are identified by the type of adaptation category. Do they accommodate? Do they address protection, or do they look at retreat? They're also categorized by scale. Are they looking at a specific building, a site, or are they deployed at the neighborhood, community, or regional level? It's talking about the lifespan of each particular technology, and then the hazards that it addresses. Does it address erosion, storm surge, or sea level rise? It gets into a description of each one and the advantages and disadvantages, and also weighing in on some of the ecosystem services. So we found it very important to engage with environmental economists who could help us understand some of the benefits that we have from our natural environment and how those are really impact the people of the Cape. And so salt marshes, our beaches, those are our cultural connections, that's our recreation. Our coastal dunes, those not only provide flooding and erosion protection, but that's a significant amount of habitat for the Cape. So oftentimes these decisions, and certainly at the local level where funding is limited, they come down to cost. These decisions are made based on financial considerations. But ecosystem services equally need to be considered, and those are frequently left out of the conversation when making decisions. So that qualitative information is important as the quantitative. So some of the trade-offs that need to be considered when you're deploying certain strategies are incorporated into the decision support tool that we've created. So for example, how much salt marsh area has been changed? Is there more or less rare species habitat? And what are those critical facilities that are being impacted? So the Cape Cod Coastal Planner tool is the online decision support tool that we've created. It contains a number of GIS map layers that serve as the planning layers to model current and future conditions. The Adaptation Strategies database is incorporated into the online planning tool, as well as the socioeconomic analysis. We've also identified the entire coast of Cape Cod by its vulnerability category. So moving from low to high vulnerabilities, really classifying its level along the coastline to those impacts to natural hazards. We looked at a lot of other similar coastlines across the region to see who else had done something similar to this, and we actually modeled our vulnerability ribbon after the South Carolina Beachfront Vulnerability Index. And so the process actually incorporates erosion rates, elevation, presence of coastal beach and bank and dune, presence of private and public shoreline structures, tidal range, and wave height. We also looked at a calculation area. So behind the scenes of the actual tool that you'll see online is a significant amount of calculations. And we have them on a hex grid here and a number of layers that are aggregated. So we've got sea level rise, erosion rates, wetlands, flood rate maps, slosh maps, coastal defense structures. So these are all aggregated and are running calculations behind the scenes. So the Cape Cod Coastal Planner, as I mentioned, is a communications tool. It's a decision support tool. And so we designed the communications and support tool to be used in a community forum, to be used in a stakeholder meeting, and to be used in a meeting where public officials and stakeholders might need to be making decisions collaboratively around what their town may want to implement for certain types of strategies. So as I mentioned earlier, it's capecodcoast.org. When you get to the homepage, you're able to go in and actually select a shoreline to start your planning. And so here you'll see the entire Cape has been identified, so you can select your shoreline location up here on the right-hand side. So I'm actually going to go up and select Provincetown Harbor. I'm going to go through some of the GIS mapping layers that are behind the scenes here and give you an idea of some of the layers that are included, and then we'll get into some of the strategies that can be employed. So I'm going to jump around a little bit so that you can get a sense of some of the areas across the region. But if we start in Provincetown Harbor, you can see here the vulnerability ribbon that's being shown in that area over here. There's an information button, so you can actually go in and take a look at information about that particular area. For example, Provincetown Harbor has 8 public beaches and is part of the Cape Cod National Seashore. What you're seeing here is a 2-foot sea level rise scenario. And if we take a look at a 4-foot sea level rise scenario, those lines that are shown in red there are all the disconnected roadways that could potentially be impacted in Provincetown. If you look at a 6-foot sea level rise scenario, you can see that's nearly the entire downtown area and potentially even further that could be disconnected. I'm not going to go through every single one of the infrastructure layers, but one that I wanted to just point out is the sewer parcels. So you can see that those yellow dots are actually all the parcels that have municipal sewer. And if we were to look at those sea level rise scenarios and the sewer parcels, certainly there would be significant impacts. So I'm going to go down to Chatham Harbor. So many people are probably aware of the town of Chatham. It's got a really unique and wonderful downtown area. It's known for its history. It's known for its working harbor. And so if we look at the town of Chatham, the area that's highlighted in green in the bottom is actually its historic district. And then you can see all of the blue dots there are actually historic places. These are historic structures within the town. And this is looking at a 4-foot sea level rise scenario. Those roads, again, are showing the disconnected roadways, which really is significantly cutting off access to some of these areas. If we go down to South Falmouth, this is kind of the main roadway into our educational facilities down by Huey and Woods Hole and a lot of our other research institutions. This area that's shown down in South Falmouth is very residentially built up. There are a lot of smaller parcels with a lot of homes in this area. And if we look at the flood zone mapping, you can see where the flood zone is here. And what's even more important to look at is that slosh zone. So if we were to have a severe hurricane, you can see the areas that would be inundated. And actually, if you look at kind of the middle northern part of that scenario, that's actually Falmouth Hospital. So moving up to Barnstable Harbor, and I'll go through these a little bit quickly here. I know we're kind of short on time, and I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch. So this is Barnstable Harbor area. If we look at another layer, this is the erosion layer. This is the 40-year erosion rate. And the disconnected roadways if we were to have a 2-foot sea level rise. And I actually live in the bottom right-hand side of that area, and that's the road I run on, which would no longer be. So if we go back up to Provincetown Harbor, where we started, and we look at potential strategies to mitigate or adapt to coastal hazards, we can see at the top here, we can look at them in terms of erosion, storm surge, and sea level rise. And in each category, it will give you the ability to have a no-action scenario. But in this case, let's choose a dune creation scenario. So we're going to apply the strategy. And this will show us where we've created our dune. And what you'll see in the output panel on the right-hand side are all of the different impacts. And so, for example, in this case, we can see that this dune creation actually protected $6.9 million of private shoreline value and $16 million of private building value. And it actually gained 1.1 acres of beach change and rare species habitat. So if you compare that to the no action scenario, you can see all the highlighted in yellow are the things that would have been lost in a scenario like this. So moving up to Cape Cod Bay, we'll try one more scenario with an actual mitigation or adaptation strategy. This is an area along Cape Cod Bay, and you'll see there's a large resort down in the bottom, and then there's a place in the middle. It's actually Cape Cod Sea Camps, where my children go to camp in the summer. And if you take a look, we're going to highlight the zone of impact here so that we can apply a certain strategy. Let's look at beach nourishment in this area. So let's apply the strategy. And you can see here that if we were to nourish this area, we'd be protecting about $208,000 of private building value, and we'd be gaining beach area. Comparing that to the no action scenario, significant amounts are certainly lost, as well as rare species habitat. So these are some of the ways that we can look at different mitigation and adaptation strategies along the coasts of the Cape. And I'd encourage you to take a look at the tool on your own time. We're always looking for ways to increase data access and capabilities for the actual decision support tool itself. And so a lot of the work that we're doing on our current Cape Cod Climate Initiative will inform this tool as well. We'll be looking at a large greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the region. There is one for the state, but we'll be looking more specifically as the Cape, as we are a unique region. Looking at areas where it makes sense for additional solar arrays, utility scale solar, and new EV charging stations. So there'll be certain areas where we'll be increasing capacity in the decision support tool. So this is where you can find that information about the project and the decision support tool and my contact information. And I want to thank you for your time today.